When an ominous spirit torments a family, they discover a haunting link between their family's past and the malevolent spirit. At a textile factory, Paul received a call from his son, Martin, informing him that his mother was talking to herself again. Paul calms him, telling him that he will be home soon. Esther, Paul's employee, asks him if he will work late tonight. Paul declines, instructing her to close the factory. As Esther closes the factory, she goes to the back room to turn off the lights. Suddenly, a figure appears. Startled, she hastily turns on the light, making the figure vanish. Confused, she turns off the light again, only for the figure to reappear close to her. Terrified, she leaves the light on. Esther returns to Paul, warning him about what she saw. However, Paul is preoccupied with the call and disregards her warning. Esther tells him to be cautious and leave. After the call, Paul decides to go home. On his way to the exit, he spotted a figure. Suddenly, all the lights turn off. Paul triggers the motion detector, only to find the woman ominously closer to him. Terrified, Paul runs for the exit, but he trips and falls. He checks his leg and sees that it is now wounded. Paul sees the figure close to him and notices it avoids the light. Seeing his office is close to him, he runs to his office and secures himself inside, arming himself with a baseball bat. Suddenly, the light starts to flicker and die. He tries to sense his surroundings, but the figure grabs him into the darkness, ending his life. Meanwhile, at home, Martin hears odd noises from his mother's room. Worried, he checks on her and finds his mother talking to herself. Martin asks if she is okay. Sophie, her mother, assures him she's okay and tells him to go to bed. On his way to bed, he looks back and sees a shadowy hand. Terrified, Martin hurries back to his room, cowering under his blanket. The following day, at school, Martin is exhausted but unable to leave because his mother hasn't arrived to pick him up. The school nurse asks if anyone else can come for him. Rebecca, Martin's stepsister, arrives at school with Brett, her boyfriend. They meet Emma, a social worker. Emma asks about the condition at home. But Rebecca explains that she already moved out. So Emma asks about their mother's condition. Rebecca informs her that she is on medication. Worried about Martin, Rebecca enters to check on him. Martin is glad to see his stepsister. Rebecca asks him about their mother. But Martin stayed quiet, avoiding the question. Emma informs Martin that if he feels unsafe, he can contact her. After the conversation, Rebecca brings Martin back home. Upon arrival, Rebecca asks about their mother. Martin reveals that Sophie is talking to Diana. Surprised by the name, Rebecca tells him that Diana isn't real and is merely a bad dream. Sophie greets them at the door, surprised by Rebecca's visit. Rebecca mentions Martin's sleeping problem. Sophie explains that they are still grieving about Paul's passing. As Martin packs upstairs, a nearby door opens on its own. Once he's done, he passes the room and sees the door ajar. Suddenly, the door closes by itself. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Sophie argue about Martin's best interest. Rebecca decides to take Martin temporarily. Despite Sophie's pleas, they leave. At Rebecca's apartment, she brings Martin to her bedroom to unpack. Brett confronts her, accusing her of deliberately hurting their mother. Enraged, Rebecca asks Brett to leave. Later that night, Rebecca wakes up and notices Martin is missing. She checks her surroundings and sees a figure on the floor. When the light outside turns on, the figure vanishes. Confused, Rebecca observes and sees the figure reappear. Suddenly, it notices her and runs towards her. But the outdoor light illuminates, making it vanish. Terrified by the dark, she rushes to turn on the lights. Confused about what happened, she seeks solace in the bathroom. Hearing someone from the shower, she checks it and sees Martin, sleeping peacefully in the tub. The next day, Emma arrives to take Martin. Rebecca expresses concerns about their mother's ability to take care of him, but Emma clarifies that legally, Sophie remains Martin's guardian. Reluctantly accepting the legal situation, Rebecca hands over Martin. Martin reassures her that he feels better, slightly easing her concern. Alone in the apartment, Rebecca notices something under the carpet. She moves the carpet and discovers Diana's name carved into the floorboards. She remembers an incident from her childhood. When she was young, Rebecca was drawing her family when she heard a noise. When she returns, the drawing is gone. Hearing a noise in the closet, she investigates and finds her drawing. In the drawing, Diana's name is replacing his father. Seeking for answers, Rebecca meets up with Brett to visit her mother's house. However, Brett is still upset about last night. Rebecca apologizes and kisses him. He accepts the apology and agrees to assist her. Arriving at her mother's house, Rebecca rings the doorbell but gets no response. Using a hidden key, they enter the empty house, and Rebecca starts searching for information about Diana. Upstairs, she hears a noise from the home office. She checks inside and finds a picture of two girls. Inspecting it, she discovers Diana and Sophie's names written on the back, along with a location, Mulberry Hill, California. Curious, Rebecca checks Paul's things and finds a tape recorder, which she decides to play. As she listens to the recording and reads the documents, she discovers a patient named Diana. The recording hints at Diana's obsession with another patient, Sophie. Rebecca found an article about Diana's failed treatment and disappearance. Overwhelmed, Rebecca visits her old room. While reminiscing, she finds her old drawing. Suddenly, the door closes. Frightened, Rebecca calls for help. Diana forcefully lifts Rebecca, but Brett opens the door, bringing light into the room, and stopping Diana. Terrified, Rebecca and Brett leaves with Paul's box. Later, Sophie and Martin watch a movie. However, Sophie begins turning off the lights, making Martin uneasy. She wants to introduce Diana, informing him that Diana is good and wants to join their family. Suddenly, Martin sees Diana above him, prompting him to flee. Upset by Martin's rejection, Diana pushes Sophie. Martin turns on the lights, making Diana disappear. Frightened, he leaves the house. At Rebecca's apartment, she and Brett examine the box for more information. They hear a knock. So Brett answers, finding Martin, who informs them that things are getting worse. Rebecca comforts Martin, encouraging him to share. Martin reveals that Diana is real. Rebecca expresses her belief and unveils Paul's research. She explains that Diana lived in a basement for 13 years, before being placed in a mental hospital. She develops a skin disorder that is sensitive to light. Reports indicate Diana's ability to manipulate minds. The hospital attempts to cure her, but she dies during the process. They hear a knock at the door, but no one is there. Another knock comes from the closet. Rebecca cautiously switches on the lights and checks the closet, finding nothing. Suddenly, Diana pulls Martin from under the bed, but Rebecca acts swiftly, rescuing Martin from her. As the haunt becomes consistent, they decide to confront their mother. During dinner, Rebecca asks Sophie about Diana, showing her a picture of herself with Diana. Rebecca explains that Sophie meets Diana at a mental hospital and reveals Diana's death during an experimental treatment. But Sophie denies her death. Refusing to listen, she walks away. Realizing they can't leave Sophie alone, they decide to stay the night. They secure the light switches with tape and light candles as a backup. Before sleeping, Rebecca tells her mother that they'll stay the night. Sophie is happy with the decision and expresses to start over the next day. Rebecca agrees happily, and Sophie thanks and hugs her. Rebecca opens her hand and sees a message, "I need help," leaving Rebecca worried. That night, the power goes out. Rebecca wakes up, grabs a flashlight, and inspects the house. She goes downstairs and discovers Brett is no longer on the couch. Meanwhile, Brett is outside and realizes that the neighborhood is on blackout. Rebecca goes to the basement to check the circuit breaker and attempts to fix the electricity. Upstairs, Martin wakes up, finding Rebecca missing and the electricity is out. He grabs a candle and starts looking for her. Upon leaving his room, Diana appears. Martin tries to escape but falls. Diana pulls him into the darkness. Using his light, Martin stops her, forcing her to retreat. Martin joins Rebecca in the basement, but she realizes it's a trap as Diana locks the door. They shout for help, hoping to be heard. Brett comes back to the house and hears Rebecca and Martin. While trying to open the door, Diana attacks him, but he quickly lights his phone to stop her. Brett scans around and sees nothing until Diana reappears when his light turns off, attacking him again. Terrified, Brett runs outside, trying to escape. But Diana attacks him and tries to incapacitate him. Using his car remote, he turns on the headlights, making her vanish. In the basement, Rebecca and Martin hear Brett's car leaving. Rebecca reassures Martin that Brett will return and suggests they explore the basement. Upstairs, Sophie wakes up and tries calling Rebecca and Martin, getting no response. Diana appears, guiding her back to her room. Sophie pleads with Diana not to harm her children, but Diana screams, frightening her. Frustrated, Sophie tries to take her medication, but Diana charges at her, causing her to hit her head on a drawer, knocking her out. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Martin create a fire. Martin finds a flashlight in the box, which turns out to be a black light. Rebecca explores the basement with a black light, finding Diana's extensive writings and mannequins with slashed faces. The last mannequin startles her as it appears to be Diana. She grabs a shovel, but Diana stops her. Martin shines a light on Diana, freeing Rebecca from her grasp. Back at the fireplace, Rebecca tells Martin they can use the black light to detect Diana and the flashlight to fight her. However, Diana puts out the fire. Frightened, they try calling their mother, but Sophie is still unconscious. Meanwhile, the police arrive with Brett. Brett warns them about Diana, but the officers disregard his warnings. The officers enter and hear a cry for help. They rush to the door, but Diana appears. The male officer pursues her and she attacks him. He fires his weapon, but Diana is unaffected and charges at him. The female officer sees her partner being dragged away, so she follows them. Rebecca urges that they need to leave, but Martin insists on saving their mother first. Suddenly, they see the female officer dead, prompting them to flee towards the exit. They meet up with Brett, and Rebecca tells him to take Martin out of the house. Rebecca rushes upstairs to save her mother. There, she hears Diana, who warns her to stay away or meet the same fate as her father. Rebecca realizes Diana killed her father and didn't abandon them. Suddenly, Diana grabs her shoulder, but Rebecca fights back, using the door to hold her. However, Diana overpowers her, causing Rebecca to fall downstairs. Diana then corners Rebecca, preventing her from escaping. Diana grows larger, terrifying Rebecca. Suddenly, Sophie appears, with a weapon. Rebecca reveals to her mother that Diana killed her father. Shocked, Sophie shoots Diana, but the bullets have no effect. Sophie realizes her link with Diana, so she sacrifices her life, destroying Diana and ending her demise. Rebecca rushes to her mother, grieving her loss. Outside, Martin and Brett heard how everything unfolded. After the long night, Brett comforts Martin and Rebecca. Relieved, they find solace in each other's presence, grateful to have emerged from the darkness.